That pill bottle in your medicine cabinet? It killed 500,000 Americans. The family that made billions from it called the addicts criminals and victimizers. They donated to museums, got their names on wings at Harvard and the Met, and walked away with $10 billion while your neighbor's child overdosed in a parking lot. This is the story of the Sacklers, the pharma family that created the opioid epidemic, killed more people than most wars, and never said sorry. The Sackler story begins not in a boardroom, but in the poverty of 1930s Brooklyn. Three brothers, Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond Sackler, were the children of Galician Jewish immigrants who had fled anti-Semitic persecution. They grew up in a world that told them they were less than, and they responded by becoming more than anyone imagined. All three went to medical school and worked together at the Creedmoor Psychiatric Center in Queens, a brutal mental institution where they witnessed suffering that would shape their entire worldview. They were even regarded as pioneers in fighting for the racial integration of blood banks. But it was Arthur, the oldest and most brilliant, who would change everything. He had a genius for marketing that bordered on manipulation, and he saw something that other doctors missed. The real money in medicine wasn't in healing patients. It was in selling the idea of healing to doctors. In 1952, the brothers bought a small pharmaceutical company called Purdue Frederick for a pittance. Arthur stayed in New York and built the first great Sackler fortune by pioneering medical advertising. He devised campaigns that appealed directly to physicians, enlisted prominent doctors to endorse products, and essentially invented the modern pharmaceutical marketing playbook. He marketed Valium so aggressively that it became the first $100 million drug, and in the process, he created the template that would later destroy America. Co-opt doctors, influence regulators, downplay addiction risks, and watch the profits roll in. After Arthur died in 1987, his estate sold his share to his brothers, who transformed Purdue Frederick into Purdue Pharma. Arthur's children, including Elizabeth Sackler, would later claim they never benefited from OxyContin profits, and legal documents confirmed their branch of the family was indeed separate from the opioid empire. But the template Arthur created was about to be deployed on a scale that would make Valium look like a footnote. In 1996, Purdue Pharma introduced OxyContin, a reformulated, slow-release version of oxycodone that the company promised was revolutionary. Richard Sackler, Raymond's son, was the driving force behind it. He pushed OxyContin through FDA approval in 1995, somehow convincing regulators to approve the claim that it was less addictive than other painkillers, despite the fact that no studies on its addictive potential had been conducted. The FDA examiner who approved this claim, Dr. Curtis Wright, left the agency shortly after and took a job at Purdue. It was a revolving door of corruption, and the Sacklers were holding it open. Then came the marketing blitz. Purdue trained thousands of sales representatives to tell doctors that OxyContin was safe, that addiction was rare, that only people with addictive personalities became hooked. They targeted high-volume prescribers, paid thought leaders in medicine like Dr. Russell Portnoy to promote opioid safety, and flooded medical journals with sponsored research. They invented the term pseudo-addiction, the idea that patients who showed signs of addiction were actually just in insufficient pain and needed higher doses. Doctors, trusting the white coats and the polished presentations, began prescribing OxyContin for everything from back pain to toothaches. The drug was marketed as a 12-hour pain reliever, but its effects often wore off in 8 hours, leading patients to experience withdrawal and crave more. Purdue knew this. Internal documents show they instructed sales reps to push higher doses because stronger pills brought more profit. In 2001, Richard Sackler sent an email to employees urging them to hammer on abusers in every way possible and push the narrative that addiction was caused by criminal addicts, not the drug itself. He wrote, "They are the culprits and the problem. They are the reckless criminals." The human cost was staggering. OxyContin generated approximately $35 billion in revenue for Purdue Pharma. It also helped launch an opioid epidemic that has killed over 500,000 Americans and addicted millions more. In small towns across Appalachia and the Rust Belt, the pill became known as hillbilly heroin. Families were destroyed. Communities were hollowed out. Morgues ran out of space. And through it all, the Sacklers grew richer. Between 2008 and 2018, as the epidemic was worsening and bodies were piling up, the family withdrew more than $10 billion from Purdue Pharma and deposited it in offshore accounts and trusts beyond the reach of American courts. They were, according to Forbes, one of the 15 wealthiest families in America, richer than the Rockefellers, even as they were being called the most evil family in America and the worst drug dealers in history. The legal reckoning was slow and incomplete. In 2007, Purdue Pharma pleaded guilty to felony charges of misbranding OxyContin and paid $600 million in criminal penalties, but the Sackler family members themselves were not charged. The marketing simply went underground. In 2015, Richard Sackler was deposed for 8 hours about his family's role in the crisis, but Purdue settled the case for $24 million before it could go to trial, sealed the deposition, and forced prosecutors to destroy millions of pages of internal documents. The deposition was later unsealed after a legal battle by the medical news site Stat. In 2018, Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey sued the Sacklers directly, revealing unredacted documents showing the family had directed doctors to overprescribe under the code name Region Zero, a list of physicians who prescribed massive amounts of OxyContin for profit, not medicine. In 2020, Purdue pleaded guilty again to criminal charges including conspiracy to defraud the United States, and the Sacklers paid $225 million to the Department of Justice while admitting no personal wrongdoing. In 2019, Purdue filed for bankruptcy, and a proposed settlement would have granted the Sacklers sweeping immunity from future lawsuits while they kept billions. In June 2024, the Supreme Court overturned that settlement, ruling that bankruptcy could not shield the family from liability. In January 2025, a bipartisan coalition of states reached a $7.4 billion settlement, the largest ever with individuals responsible for the opioid crisis, that ends Sackler control of Purdue and bans them from selling opioids in the United States. But money could not buy reputation. As the truth emerged, the Sackler name became toxic. Museums that had accepted their donations, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Guggenheim, the American Museum of Natural History, the National Portrait Gallery in London, the Tate Galleries, and NYU Langone Medical Center, announced they would no longer take Sackler money and began removing the family name from wings and institutes. The name that had been synonymous with philanthropy and art patronage became a symbol of corporate murder. Nan Goldin, the photographer who had nearly died from OxyContin addiction, led a campaign that made the Sackler name untouchable in cultural institutions worldwide. When finally forced to testify before Congress in 2020, David and Kathy Sackler offered apologies for the pain people have suffered, but refused to apologize for their own role in creating the crisis. When asked directly if they would apologize for their actions, Kathy Sackler said she was very angry that some Purdue employees broke the law, as if the family had been victims, not architects. A 2001 email from Richard Sackler, responding to a message saying, "If abusers die, well, that is the choice they made," simply replied, "Abusers aren't victims. They are the victimizers." This was the family's philosophy in 5 words. The addicts were the criminals. The family that made billions from their suffering was the victim. The Sackler dynasty is a story of American darkness. 3 brothers who escaped poverty and persecution built a pharmaceutical empire on the promise of healing, then weaponized that empire to create the deadliest public health crisis in modern history. They used Arthur's marketing genius to sell addiction as pain relief. They used Richard's ruthlessness to blame the victims. They used lawyers, lobbyists, and offshore accounts to protect their fortune, while 500,000 Americans died. They bought museum wings and university buildings to launder their reputation, then watched as that reputation crumbled. They have been called the worst drug dealers in history, and the label fits, not because they sold drugs on street corners, but because they sold death in pill bottles, dressed it in white coats, and called it medicine. The next time you see the name Sackler on a museum wall, remember, behind every donation was a body count. Behind every wing was a wingless family, destroyed by a pill that was never supposed to be this dangerous, but was always supposed to be this profitable.